Hello and welcome to another episode of Cavell Cloud Conversations with me, as always, Finbarr and Patrick. How are we doing, Patrick?
Very well, thank you, Finbarr. Very well indeed.
How has your week in telecoms been?
It has been, considering it's the summer months, still very busy, which is good for a number of reasons. There's lots of stuff going on, lots of different projects, lots of different interesting research projects for various companies, and we've got loads of our own proprietary research coming out, so absolutely loads and loads of data points to analyse. And I believe, Finbarr, despite my usual lack of preparation, that data points is one of the things that we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, so Patrick was informed, as always, a few minutes before the call on the topic that we were going to be debating today. No. I give him a bit more heads up sometimes. But the topic I really wanted to talk about, so there's a lot of movement happening at the moment. I've spent all this week researching voice AI companies, and the findings of that are going to come out soon. You know, how much funding they're getting, what are they actually doing, are things kind of interesting? We've had some interesting stuff where Grok has launched new image generation, and there's no filter to stop it generating images of celebrities or anything like that. So if your face is in the public, it can just make videos and photos of you. Great. And then there's been some really interesting research which I was reading maybe a couple of weeks ago, which indicated that, if you hyper-personalize a customer journey, you can push someone into purchasing something, but that they know that they've been pushed, so that their regret on that purchase, is much, much higher, and the rate of refunds increases. And because of that, the topic for today is, should AI be allowed to emotionally profile customers in real time, or profile customers at all? Is it better service, or is it surveillance? Right? Or maybe we need stricter laws to deal with these kind of things. Let's just start off, Patrick, right? With a sentiment-based question.
Okay.
You have a problem with your internet provider. You call them up all the time to try and get this solved. Somewhere in their database on you is a little flag on your profile that just says difficult. How do you feel about that?
I don't care.
Okay, you don't care.
I genuinely don't care. And have you been surveying me? It seems like this is extraordinarily accurate. I mean, I won't reveal who my internet provider is. But no, I don't have any particular problem if they have labelled me as a difficult customer, because I would assume that there is some sort of rationale behind that, and therefore maybe I would then be routed to a more efficient avenue in order to resolve my query. So no, I don't. Even if I was about to swear, then even if they used stronger language and had some sort of flag on my profile that said, Patrick is X, I'm not particularly bothered. I don't.
I think you flagged a very interesting point there. It is about not just about what they say about you, but how they respond to that piece of information. So when we're talking about gathering sentiment on people, we're obviously doing it for a reason. And that reason could either be to push you into a different workflow, if we're talking about the automated contact center, or it can be to pair you up with a specific team or respondent or something like that. So I guess you're saying, look, if I'm flagged as difficult, great, I'm difficult. Give me the best service you can to get my issue solved quickly. Otherwise, I'm going to be difficult here for the next 2 hours.
Yeah, I suppose that is a very good point, though, the way you've looked at it. I suppose that very much does depend on how so if I'm flagged as and I think you've put that very diplomatically as difficult. If I'm flagged as difficult, and as I made with my sort of immediate assumption, that would push me to get slightly better service. However, if the difficult flag means actually let's fob this guy off and keep him away from our agents for as long as possible because we know we're at a particularly busy time at the moment and he's going to be a pain in the proverbial, then in that case I don't want to be flagged as difficult. So you're right, it's very much about the the outcome and action rather than necessarily the flag that I'm sort of tagged with.
And this is kind of where things get quite interesting as well, because as you say, if someone is flagged as difficult, they may not want to put them in front of their best agent, especially if that person, I'm not saying any of this about Patrick, we're talking in hypotheticals, but if you were the sort of person who lost your plot with someone on the end of a phone and started swearing at them, there's going to be, in the future, an understanding of which agents can handle that and which agents can't. And if the agent that can handle it is on holiday or isn't available, then you might find yourself with a longer waiting time. But to bring back, so I mentioned Grok earlier, and I thought it was quite interesting. You can make fake images of celebrities, and deepfake really becoming a thing. But there is the not deliberate deepfakery. There is the I have to trust that the engine the company is using is correctly understanding me. So let's change this. So there's three scenarios. You're flagged as difficult, you get better customer service. You're flagged as difficult and you don't get better customer service. But in both those cases, you've accepted this flag of difficult is fair.
Yeah.
How do you feel if you're not difficult and you've been given that flag and the company is treating you differently? You might not know, but if you did realize, if you requested your customer information and they said, these are the keywords associated with you on our database, and it said difficult.
Okay, so good point. So if I had been flagged as because one thing, having worked in the very distant past in a call center back in the day, as we say, if I was flagged, I like to think I am very diplomatic when I speak to agents across any medium, because I appreciate that it's not the agent's fault generally as to whatever and it tends to be something I'm complaining about. So if I was flagged as so if we slightly change the term, if I was flagged as abusive, having known that I'm not a bit, now that does bother me, because I don't want to be the difficult piece. I think because it's a relatively sort of ambiguous term, I'm not so bothered about. If I had a flag on my internet provider's account that was abusive, for example, and therefore I am rooted either in some particular way, that is slightly different. I think with when it's stronger terminology, you're absolutely right. I wouldn't want to be flagged as that. If it's something that I think the interpretation of difficult, I think in certain of my customer interactions, I think that was probably a fair assertion. But if it was something that I thought was completely outrageous, abusive, and anything else like that, or to go the other way,
or if it just got it wrong, right? If it just wasn't true.
Or if it was something that I completely thought was untrue, or just to look at it a slightly different way, it was, I can't think of the exact what the exact single word is, but
easy
sales target, for example.
Yeah, for sure.
Sucker can be.
But there is that side of this, isn't there? It's not just flagging someone with will buy an iPhone every year without fail.
I would like to not be flagged. So you make a very important distinction there. It does depend very much on the how am I flagged. But I suppose you potentially going to come onto this. I should imagine a lot of businesses do this anyway, and we have absolutely no idea what is held on our customer record of account unless we're submitting some sort of freedom of information request to that particular company about what records and details they hold on me.
So you are correct. That is exactly where I was going next. So very well predicted. Because to me, I think the interesting side of this is that we're moving away from one-to-one interaction based, and we have been doing this for years, right? I mean, before automation and AI and LLMs, companies were creating profiles on people, identifying them as good sales targets, telling people whether or not they thought they were, at risk or, difficult callers. Like, you will have a profile, and you have had one for years at most of the companies that you buy stuff from. But I guess the difference now is in two ways. I mean, the first thing is there is a bias being created by a system that is automated that you don't understand how it works. And that's a big deal for me as someone, and as you say, it may never matter because we might just get better customer service and everything's fine. But the reality is that there is a system that is interpreting you in a way that you haven't probably consented to, or you've signed the terms and conditions. But I'd argue, and that's another topic for a different podcast, that isn't consent because you don't understand them.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you don't read them, and you don't understand them when you do read them, so you can't really have informed consent. And then there's the whole idea that accent, mood, tone. I mean, people in the UK, I know it. We swear very casually. And I have to work and you have to work to not swear in a business context. Absolutely, because we just use certain words that I won't say in replacement for words like very or, we just do. But if those words are flagged by an American contact center as being negative words, then you very quickly get treated a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. I get the abusive tag, even with a relatively passive colloquialism that I've used in a UK context. Yeah, no, very fair point. And you're absolutely right, I think. But the only thing that I would say to that, and I'd be really interested, because you've obviously been looking at the voice AI stuff all week, is previously the information that's been held on me on my customer profile and my customer record of, as we use the example of my internet provider, in the past that will have been made generally notes from an agent on a call or an interaction that I've had. So that's been their personal interpretation of the interaction that we've had.
And it would have gone into a system as well at some point, but yeah.
But whereas now there is what you're explaining is there is a wider intelligence piece that is being utilized on that, and spotting patterns and predicting behavior and creating profiles based on that information, and we understand that less than someone's personal interpretation.
The key difference as well is an agent being motivated to write a note and add a tag to your account as a manual process, which would only pick out the worst offenders, right? So, it has a natural bit of filter and pre-selection versus what is happening now, where every call is being tracked, recorded.
Yeah, and everything is being set. Yeah, really good point. Yeah, so thinking back to my call center days, you're right. I would often write, and I won't mention the company, I would often write, if I had called someone, I would write grumpy if I thought they were grumpy, but that would only be in a very specific case if I thought they were particularly grumpy. Whereas now, all of everything is being interpreted,
and also, that distinction between, if we're having a negative interaction on the call because I'm a customer and I'm frustrated, and at the end of the call I apologize, you don't write that note, right? If you say, look, sorry, I got so worked up, this is about my dog, she's sick, you as the customer service agent might decide, actually, we're not going to write anything. The difference now is the whole call is tracked.
Very good point, yeah.
And then there's a weighting applied to the strength of the apology as to how much of the negative sentiment you know what I mean? There's systems at play here. And I think there's an argument that without an understanding of actually how it works, consumers can't consent. But they are being manipulated by them. And I think that's incredibly important. Now, I think we'll come back around to your side of things in terms of how good the service that someone receives might mean all of that doesn't matter and people don't care. But as a European, I do care. Let's put it that way. This notion that anytime I interact with a company, there's a system that's going to mean I talk to a certain person, I get spoken to in a certain way, I get escalated further without my understanding of how that works, bothers me. And then also it makes me wonder, should I just aim for difficult but not abusive on every single customer interaction that I do, so that I get that difficult level of service where they say, hey, this one's a bit tricky, can we deal with him with a white glove?
Yeah, I think, and not to get, and we often do get slightly philosophical on these podcasts. So knowing you, from both our sort of professional and personal lives, I can't imagine there is ever a point where you would do something sort of, or you would say something that would be deemed unacceptable. You're a nice person. The interaction is always going to be, I think that's been generally my approach, is that I'm a nice person generally, so therefore I will be judged as such, even in these new systems. And you're right, I have no idea how these algorithms interpret my the words I use, the sentiment, the tone, all of those things. I have no real technical understanding of how the companies are interpreting that. But my general approach to philosophically to life and also to communicating with anyone would be, generally I'll be quite nice, and hopefully, that will be reflecting. I suppose the one exception to that though is on automated systems, especially like on an IVR, if I think it's rubbish, and again I was about to swear then, I will just repeatedly hit hash or just shout agent, 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 agent until I get to a human. So I suppose there are slight exceptions to that, but I still wouldn't be, actively abusive to the bot or whatever it was.
So here's two things then, I guess. So the first thing is that escalation is quite interesting, because there was a new law put forward in America only in the last 2 weeks that basically tries to enshrine the right to escalate, right, to every single interacted automation. And that means that whatever call you're on, or chat or whatever, if you say, no, I've had enough of this, I want to speak to a human being, the company has to make that happen. And that has huge implications for the number of agents that people have to retain and stuff like that. But it's kind of fascinating. But I guess here's a question, right? Do you think that it's acceptable or desirable that we emotionally profile everyone in order to give them better customer service? Or do you think that emotion should never play a part, because that biases the conversation to one way or another? So if I call up and I'm upset and I get better service, I'm always going to try and sound upset. If I call up and I just get the same service regardless of my emotions, is that a better outcome? Or is it better that it takes my emotions into consideration?
I personally think that it is that in an idealistic world, it would be better if emotions are taken into consideration, regardless of that. But we don't necessarily live in an idealistic world, and you've put several points during this conversation that have made me think a little bit more about that. But generally, in an ideal world where all intentions are good, and obviously we don't live in that world, so I'm suddenly regressing my own statement.
and also, let's be honest, the companies that are selling these solutions do not have your best intentions in mind all the time. I mentioned at the start of the call, people who are receiving hyper-personalized sales messaging when they log into a mobile phone seller's website that leads them to buying that new phone upgrade and then immediately regretting it because their buttons were pushed in a way that they didn't want to be pushed, right? And that is kind of an indication these people maybe they don't have your best interests in.
Yeah, and I suppose also the type of system that you're interacting with. I mean, obviously, a few months ago, Sam Altman said about how much it's costing, pleasantries on interactions with ChatGPT, and I have always, I think out of habit, used pleasantries when interacting with, completely, automated systems that have no human contact. So, but my interactions have now slightly changed. So the way that I'm perceived emotionally has changed because of the systems I'm interacting with. So there's an additional point there that you're right, that I would have been perceived emotionally one way historically, and I've slightly tweaked that because of the way that I interact with different types of systems. So in an ideal world, yes, I think emotion should be taken into account, but you're right, there are some. It would be good to understand in each individual case how my emotions are being interpreted and how that is affecting the ultimate service that I get. And also, as you said, with terms and conditions, who's that being shared with? What other companies is that being shared with? All of those additional questions about data privacy and sharing and all of those things.
I'm imagining a funny situation where, much like with Uber, you kind of log into any company profile and there's a button that says, see how we view you, and it gives you your company profile. But then because you have right to delete your data, you just delete it until you get a good profile.
Start again. Yeah, absolutely.
And then there'll be loads of guides on TikTok to be like, how to get your best customer service profile. And then there'll be one company that provides a profile across all of the industries, and you're like, how to game your customer service AI profile so it gets you the best service on every call and stuff like that. One final
absolutely.
question, and just a thought. Obviously, the EU has banned a lot of stuff from the AI capabilities. You're not allowed to search for faces online. I don't know if you knew that. You used to be able to Google image search someone's face and you would find their face, but you're not allowed to use AI to search for faces online anymore. So actually you can't Google image search photos of people. But how would you feel if the EU just said, look, human emotions, they're a bit too close to the bone. Let's just ban emotional analytics from AI in general, or from at least AI in customer service?
I feel that that would be potentially inhibiting progress. So I realise that there are pitfalls and there are genuine concerns, and the deep fake stuff is genuinely scary. And obviously has huge ramifications, mainly for celebrities, but also for a lot of, people in their personal lives as well, who aren't, in any way famous. So the deep fake stuff, I think, is a slightly side issue. But in terms of, I think if we inhibit the platforms too much, we are potentially stymieing progress. And ultimately we need to put guardrails in place, and I don't profess in any way to know what those guardrails should be or how we should define them, but there should be guardrails in place that don't inhibit the technological advancement of these systems. Ultimately, if we start to say, oh no, you can't analyze emotions in any way, we want these systems to be as accurate and useful to, and again, we've got incredibly philosophical here, we want these to be as useful as possible to humanity in generally, and within our specific realm within communications. If you take emotions away from AI and machine learning tools and say you can't use emotions, then how are they going to be useful for people? Because so much of our interaction is emotive. And I think if you take that away, it causes it creates a real restriction that we're not going to be able to overcome. So we have to have some sort of guardrails. I don't know what those are going to be, but I don't think you can remove emotion completely from these systems. Otherwise, they're not going to be useful for people that are inherently emotional.
So the funny thing is, I do actually agree. I think we can't remove this kind of tracking or data. I think it will provide better customer service in the long run. I actually think, and this is my 2 cents to kind of wrap up, that the actual solution to a lot of these problems is to increase the methods of redress for people who are phoning into customer service. So what do I mean? I mean that right to escalate. So if you're on a call and the automation is bad, you can escalate easily. Okay, you're starting to think there's going to be a lot of people who just want to speak to a human. They're going to go straight in and speak to a human. But actually, most people are going to give the automation a try. So what the right to escalate actually does is increases the quality of automation. Because if you don't want all of these calls escalating, then you better make sure that your automation that goes in straight away is good.
Yeah,
right?
Completely.
And I think the same thing happens with hyper-personalization. You don't fix hyper-personalization on calls or with automation or with sales by stopping the hyper-personalization, because it is useful. What you actually do is increase the strength of the right to refund. So you increase the ability to refund from a contract you sign with the mobile phone carrier or refund a purchase. You increase the window where no questions refunds are allowed and make the process super easy. And by doing that, you say to someone, yes, you can push me to buy this product. But if you push me too far to buy something I don't want through your personalization, then I'm just going to refund it when I wake up tomorrow and realize what I've done. And you're not going to be able to stop me. So I think the actual way to solve it is to let that technology do what it wants to do and increase the wheels of how consumers can respond when it does something they don't want by refunding or by escalating or something like that, so that it forces companies to actually be better in the first instance, because otherwise they're going to get those negative outcomes. And that's where I think we go. So this has been, I think, a really interesting chat. I think there's a lot of soul searching. I mean, we got quite philosophical, but I think there's a lot of soul searching in the future of all of the communications industry. So not just CX. I think this sort of stuff will be deployed internally on, Microsoft Teams within an organization? Was my colleague frustrated on that call? How do I talk to my boss better? Was my boss annoyed with me? You know, all this kind of stuff I think is coming. And I think there is a bit of a debate as to how far it is allowed to go and whether it's a positive. So have you enjoyed this debate? What are your thoughts on what we've been talking about? Do you think that stuff like emotional profiling should be banned? Do you think it is the way of the future? Do you think we should put more guardrails into how far it can go or how it interacts with you? You know, we do love to engage. So if you're listening to this and you want to engage with us, just drop some comments in there. If you found this interesting, share it with your friends, share it with us. Tell us you found it interesting. And as always, we will speak to you very, very soon.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.